welcome to Bold and Blunt, and I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, Christian conservative. Look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. And today, Promise Keepers. What do you know about them? What have you heard about them? How do you view them? And in this day and age of transgenderism and where boys can be girls one day, back to boys the next day, and girls can be boys, and a single girl can go by they instead of she or I. In this day and age of utter chaos, the Promise Keepers have come under attack. They've come under assault. This isn't really surprising because Promise Keepers believe in Jesus, and they believe in biblical principles as it applies to the individual and to married couples and to families. So naturally, that puts them at odds with modern society. So today, Promise Keepers, there's a fight going on right now over their annual event that they're holding this year in Texas, in Arlington, Texas, at the stadium there, the football stadium. And my guest is going to delve a little bit more deeply into the arguments and the defense of the Promise Keepers going to Texas. And before I get into that, 50% off deal. Here we go. Regular listeners know this is coming. 50% off a year's access to the digital platform of the Washington Times. Go to washingtontimes.com/Cheryl, type in your information, and you will have a year's access for 50% off. It's a pretty good deal. You should check it out. You know what else you should do at the same time? Go to washingtontimes.com and click on the hyperlinks of my name, Cheryl K. Chumley. Scroll down to the bottom, and there you will find some easy directions how to sign up for my 3 times a week newsletter that comes out from the Washington Times, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, all before noon. In your email box, you can get access to all my commentaries as well as my twice-weekly podcasts. Or you could just sign up for the twice-weekly podcast, Tuesdays and Thursdays, your choice. See all the freedoms you get here? Freedoms, they just keep on coming. It's all liberty-minded here at Bold and Blunt. So check it out. And I want to give one more quick announcement. I am now doing the 4th hour of Alan Keyes' Let's Talk America video show through IMTV Network and offered by the Brighteon.com platform. So every Monday from 4 to 5 p.m., and if you can't catch it live, you can see the show also after on Brighteon.com. And it's called Bold and Blunt, the video version. So here you get twice a week, Bold and Blunt, the podcast audio version. And once a week, every Monday, 4 to 5 p.m., you can see Bold and Blunt, the video version. Coming up in July, I have Congressman Jody Hice as a guest on that. So every week I try and have an interesting guest. Last week it was Mark Morano with Climate Depot, and we were just dissecting Joe Biden's executive order on climate change and all the ways that this is going to kill, and then beat to death more individual freedoms in America. So you'll want to go back in time and check that out. But in the meanwhile, go to Brighteon.com and find Bold and Blunt, the video version, and tune in every Monday. Love to have you. So, Promise Keepers, what are they? All right, well, my guest today is Ken Harrison, who is the chairman and CEO of Promise Keepers. So he's going to give you a better description than I could. But basically, it's an evangelical Christian organization, right? And so that means to the left that it's pure evil, and they must be stopped, they must be stifled, they must be choked to death, and their views must never, ever, ever be spread in the general public. Well, too bad for that, because they have an event scheduled for the Dallas Cowboys Stadium, officially called AT&T Stadium, and it is going on July 16th and 17th. in Arlington, Texas at the AT&T Stadium. And it is going on despite the fact that this particular USA Today writer just wants the stadium officials, the powers who be of the stadium, to give the boot to the Promise Keepers. Why? Well, the writer starts a piece this way. I'm tired, just really tired. I'm quoting from this piece. Tired of ignorance, tired of fear, tired of how some use both as weapons, cloaking bigotry as patriotism or religious freedom. All right, let's look at that quote real quick. Let's key in on it. You can see where this is headed, right? So if you're a Bible believer, if you're a Christian and a Bible believer, and let me just fess up now, I am one of those people. But if you're a Christian, a Bible believer, and you actually think that the Bible speaks truths that are pertinent to today, that it's not just an archaic book that means nothing today because, well, those were words penned in the old days and they're not pertinent today. But if you're one of those Christians who actually believes that the Bible has relevance today and you try your best to live by it, then automatically you're setting yourself against the secular world. And it's a world that looks at you as ignorant, fear-mongering, and a bigot, right? A bigot who uses the Bible to cloak your bigotry. So that's what this writer is opening up and saying right at the get-go. I'm tired, really tired. I'm tired of ignorance, tired of fear, tired of both ignorance and fear being used as weapons, cloaking bigotry as patriotism or religious freedom. Here we go. The latter, back to the piece again. The latter happened with a man named Ken Harrison, who will be my guest, and he can speak for himself here in a few minutes when he's on. He can address this, the accusation that he's ignorant and a bigot and so forth. The latter happened with a man named Ken Harrison, yada yada, whose evangelical Christian organization, meaning the Promise Keepers, opposes same-sex marriage and champions that men should head the household. And from that, this writer gathers that Ken Harrison is ignorant and a bigot and cloaking both in his Bible-based beliefs. Back to the piece. Harrison appeared recently on an extremist right-wing show when he said, I guess this show will be considered an extremist right-wing show when Harrison appears in just a few minutes, when he said in part, quote, one of the things they're doing to make their agenda happen is destroying the identity of the American people. And if they can get Christians, especially Christian men, to sit down, be silent, and be passive, then they can be effective. Okay, so this writer is quoting Harrison. Harrison is quoted as saying that. Nothing wrong with that so far. Anyhow, this writer goes on to say that Harrison also said, it's working. Christian men are not standing up for what's right. I mean, you think about how quickly we went from homosexual marriage to men putting on dresses, being called women, and playing on women's basketball teams. Where are the Christian men? Now, that is a very good question, right? Because we did go so quickly in this society, from accepting homosexuality openly to using the U.S. Supreme Court to rubber stamp it into law, to putting little boys in dresses and then sticking them into the girls' dressing rooms in school, to allowing that boys and girls don't have to be boys and girls. They can be whatever they want to be. And then they can call themselves whatever they want to be. They don't have to call themselves he or she. They can call themselves some other pronoun, some other made-up pronoun. That's a combination of he and she or tree or whatever. Doesn't matter. So this writer takes offense with Ken Harrison taking offense with that. Well, at least Ken Harrison's offense with the chaos created by the left that's pushing this radical LGBTQ agenda. At least Harrison's offense comes from applying biblical principles to modern times and seeing, hey now, something's not right here. Back to the USA Today writer. Normally, a story like this would just stay in that corner of the internet and do what that type of stuff does. I guess this writer is suggesting that Harrison is so offensive that normally his words would just be stuck in some Wild West corner of the internet where nobody would see it except the most Wild West types. Except this time is different, the writer goes on to say, because this time the Promise Keepers, remember, Harrison heads up the Promise Keepers, are having a live event in July at AT&T Stadium, the same stadium used by the Dallas Cowboys. Harrison says there will be 80,000 Christian men attending. Okay, here's where we get to the meat of this story. Here's where the opinion comes in. Comments like Harrison's, USA Today writer writes, shouldn't be anywhere near an NFL team. A company like AT&T shouldn't be associated with them either. Okay, so Harrison believes the Bible. Harrison believes in what the Bible teaches men should be versus women should be, and the roles for men versus the roles for women. Harrison actually dares to believe that boys shouldn't overnight decide that they're girls and that society should automatically treat them like girls instead of the boys with the mental issues and behavioral problems that they actually have. Harrison believes all that, and yet Harrison and his views shouldn't be anywhere near an NFL team. This is the same NFL that let Colin Kaepernick get by with his circus act on the playing field for so long, and that allowed other players to take knees during the playing of the national anthem, and that allowed other players to go on the field with their hands up, don't shoot type of theatrics. This is the same NFL that for years turned blind eyes to things like drugs and domestic abuse and just offensive behavior from their players. But Harrison is the one that shouldn't be allowed anywhere near the NFL team, the NFL stadium, because his views as they are based on the Bible are too offensive. A company like AT&T shouldn't be associated with them either. That's crazy. That's just crazy. Let me just read one more line from this USA Today writer's opinion piece. It goes like this. By allowing this conference to happen, the Promise Keepers Conference, by allowing this conference to happen at one of today's football's meccas, and by AT&T allowing it, they are helping to mainstream hate speech. There you have it. The Bible is hate speech. We knew this was coming. We knew at some point in time the growing secularism of America would lead to Bible believers being labeled as haters, guilty of hate speech, guilty of promoting hateful actions against others, guilty of promoting violence against others. This is where we're at in America. This is just yet one more sign in a long train of signs that we've seen in recent times. That we've seen where patriots, those who love America, and Christians have come under attack from the far left. Right? Look at the whole MAGA movement that the left rejected and fought so hard to stifle and silence. It was based in large part on patriotism. It was also based in large part on the belief that in America rights come from God, not government, which is a fundamental Christian idea. This is the enemy to the left, Christian believers. This is what it comes down to. Here's the face-off, right? And Bible believers know this. We know that in the end, It's always a battle of principalities. No matter what is going on in the political world, no matter what fight is emerging in the culture, no matter what's going on in the education system, in the economy, it can all be traced back to the battle of principalities. And here we have it facing off. A USA Today writer who is calling out the Promise Keepers CEO as guilty of hate speech, as mainstreaming hate speech. Why? Because of a belief in biblical teachings, of a belief in the Bible. And that is oh so offensive to the left, to the secular, to the demonic forces that are actively working in this world, that they have to shut it down. So, this is the fight. It's simple. And now, I have Ken Harrison here on Bold and Blunt to discuss this further. Ken, thanks so much for being here today on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you, Cheryl. I appreciate it.
So I read through this USA Today opinion piece that basically slammed your organization and called on the Dallas Cowboys stadium owners to boot your scheduled event. What is your response to that?
Well, we're grateful for the free publicity.
There you go.
And the Cowboys have been amazing. The organization, the stadium, have been just great. And what they were booting us for is the fact that we stand for biblical marriage, unashamedly. The marriage is between a man and a woman. We stand for the gospel, and it's amazing. A good friend of mine, John Stonestreet, says what was unquestionable. Wait a minute. Let me get my quote right. What was unthinkable 10 years ago is unquestionable today. And we're seeing it to the point where we're not even allowed to have a conversation anymore. And we stand with the Bible, and sometimes that's going to be with culture, and sometimes it isn't. But the very fact that we have major publications saying we shouldn't even be able to gather as people anymore because we disagree on an issue that, as of 5 years ago, was still illegal in most states is really something.
Yeah, and it wasn't exactly a polite call to boot you. The writer was calling you and the organization basically intolerant, and you're using religion to cloak your bigotry, which you guys stand for biblical principles. That's pretty much it, yes?
Yeah, the funny thing is, too, there's so much judgmentalism, I feel like, in the world. And it's funny that people keep pointing the bony finger at Christians and saying we're judgmental, when in actuality, that's exactly the opposite of what Promise Keeper stands for. We're here to tell men to start acting like men, which is to be gentle, humble, loving of our neighbors, to care for the poor. That's what Promise Keepers is about, and it's what it's been about for 30 years. But there's been so many people that tried to misconstrue that message of whatever they've tried to throw it into. Never have we ever said anything hateful or intolerant of anybody. It's exactly the opposite. We were the ones that really started the reconciliation conversation about conversations about race. We were the ones that really pushed a diverse stage way back in the early 90s before it was even popular. We've always been sort of at the forefront of unifying men around humility and love with each other. And so it's amazing that 30 years later, these kinds of lies are continuing to be spread by people of complete ignorance.
Well, it's funny because it seems to me very similar to what the Boy Scouts of America went through. It's almost like they're attacking Bible-based principles being taught to young boys, and now they're attacking Promise Keepers' Bible-based beliefs being taught to men. I mean, how are we going to get virtuous, principled men in this country if we're constantly attacking them?
Well, I think, one of the things we have to do is make sure that we all understand, all Christians understand that we're all sinners, saved by the grace of Jesus Christ, and that none of us deserve the love he's given us. It is completely unmerited favor. And then when we get through that, we can start to say to men, understand that Jesus said that if you love him and you stand with him, you will be hated by people. And so we need to get away from this idea that if we do and stand for the right thing, we're going to be popular, because a lot of times we're not going to be popular. And so we need to remind men of the words of Christ. Stand for what's right, stand with Scripture, and if the world hates you, then Jesus said it's because they hated me before they ever hated you.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a Christian and you're being attacked for your beliefs, then really you're doing something right. So,
That's right.
talk to us a little bit more about Promise Keepers, the organization, uh, the genesis, how many members you have. Just basically, I understand your mission call, but maybe some specifics about the outreach that you do.
Sure, and thanks for that's a great question because I probably would have forgotten to do that. I mean, it might be some people who are going either who is Promise Keepers or what happened to
Yeah.
Promise Keepers. um, yeah, it is the biggest movement of men in the church history. In the 1990s, there were over 7 million men that sold out NFL stadiums coming to worship Christ, and there was 2 days events. It was a Friday night and a Saturday morning, and then it resulted in what was called Stand in the Gap. It was 1.4 million men who gathered in the Washington Mall in October of '97. And there's still a picture of that event when you walk into the Park Police headquarters, because not only is it the biggest gathering in the history of Washington, D.C., but after it was over, they left that place cleaner than when they came. So whenever you have these groups gathered in Washington, they usually take tons of trash out. When Promise Keepers, when the men of God came together, there wasn't a gum wrapper left on the ground after that. They policed up after themselves. It was really quite a testament to the men of God. Promise Keepers really started to decline after that for lots of various reasons, and so we're just now coming back. And so we're gathering together at Dallas Cowboy Stadium on July 16th and 17th, and this will be the first NFL stadium gathering of Promise Keepers in about 20 years. And so we're going back to our roots of who we are, and really, there's something powerful when men of God come together and worship. And yeah, some people may be saying, well, can women come? Why can't women come? Well, sometimes it's important for men to gather together. It's even scriptural. And because we can have conversations when it's just men that we might not be able to have in a church. Conversations that are pretty direct about some of the sins that men face and what we need to do about repenting and turning to Christ over them. But it will also be offered in simulcast so that women can watch if they want to. It'll be simulcast around the world. We had to do our virtual event last year because of COVID, and we had 1.2 million people watch across the world in 84 countries. Really
Wow.
unbelievable. And this time, it will be translated into 9 languages in real time. So if you're sitting in the stadium, you can put headphones on and hear it in Spanish or Russian or French, or I forget what all the languages
Wow.
are. And actually, we're going to have Pastor Samuel Rodriguez is going to preach half of his message in English and half of it in Spanish. So all of our English-speaking men will get to put headphones on and listen to it translated in English in real time. But I think it's going to be a really cool moment of unity around Christ.
So, what makes a Christ-like man?
Man, what a great question.
Well,
You
because
know, the
the
ultimate
secular
template
world.
for all people is Jesus, right?
Right.
And we forget who Jesus really was. Jesus was the ultimate in kind, but he was also bold and courageous, and he was also confrontational.
Yep.
And Jesus took on injustice in his time in pretty bold ways. I mean, people forget. When they said to Jesus how blessed he was, he said, don't say that. I came to set the world on fire, and how I wish it was already alight. I came to turn father against son and mother against daughter. And what did he mean by that? He meant to say that he was going to inspire the people to follow in his words and stand for God, and some people, maybe even in their own families, would hate them for it. But so a godly man is like Christ. I've always said that you can measure a person's walk with Christ by their level of humility, that there's something about a humble man or woman that really shows that they're in love with Jesus. And there's something about an arrogant person that says they don't really love Jesus because they clearly haven't understood how really depraved each one of us is. And only because of the grace of Jesus are we anything other than condemned sinners.
Don't you find that such a challenge to be both humble and bold at the same time?
Um, I know I understand why you're asking that, but I don't think so, because I think when you really understand truth and you really understand it's not about you, then you can be bold because you're not worried about being popular. You know, I think we need to start to really identify what is the truth is, and we stand on that no matter what, even if everyone hates us. I mean, you think about Winston Churchill in 1940 when the Nazis were relentlessly bombing London, and the Nazis had made the mistake of also attacking the Soviet Union, and they were depleted. And so Hitler sues Churchill for peace. And all of England is pushing Churchill. I mean, the towns are getting every night just bombed. And people are like, oh my gosh, peace. You got to sign up for peace. Parliament, the press, everybody. He says, no. The reason? because it's going to allow Hitler to put all of his forces against the Soviet Union, and then he's going to beat him, and he's going to turn around and come back, and this time they'll run us over. And so he stood against the whole world for freedom. And so there was a humility and an incredible boldness in a great man like Churchill, because he understood that even against all popularity in his own people, he was going to do what was right. And the whole world is free today because of what one man did.
Good story. Good story, Ken. That's a good explanation. So say a transgender comes out to Dallas. What are you going to do? So he's open, transgender, wearing a skirt, mocking. How are you going to handle that?
We're going to love him. And actually, I had this question. I actually had a friend call me, somebody I know a little bit. He said, "Hey, I've got a daughter who now identifies as a man, living in Los Angeles, and I want to know what I should do about that." And I said, "Invite your child to the Promise Keepers event." He said, "You'd let," and he called his transgender, he called him a son. He said, you would invite my son?" I said, "Absolutely. In fact, bring him up to me, and I'll give him a hug, and I'll tell him about Christ." And so we want to invite everybody to come. Everybody gets to hear the gospel of Jesus.
See, I think the answer you just gave is the same answer that so many Christians would give to that same question, and yet, as you said at the opening, it's Christians who get labeled intolerant and the haters.
Well, I started off life as an LA cop back in the late 80s and the early 90s during all the Rodney King stuff. And one of the things I learned about people in such a baptism of fire as a young man is that people project their guilt onto others. You can see what somebody is guilty of, but by what they're always accusing everybody else of. And you show me a man who's super jealous, and I'll show you a man who's a cheater. You show me a woman who thinks everybody's lying, and I'll show you a liar. Well, when we see people who are always pointing the finger of racism or like you're talking about division, they're announcing what they themselves are guilty of. They are the ones who are the liars. They are the ones who are the who want to spread disunity. They're just simply projecting their own garbage onto us.
It's the Democrat Party summed up. That's pretty much it. So I know our time is growing tight, but I'm curious. So tell me, and it's probably on your website, but I want to hear it in your own words anyhow. Tell me how what led you to start Promise Keepers? What was your journey like? You just said you were an officer before, an officer of the law, but how did you get to here?
And that's a great question. And the short version of it is, after the LAPD, I got into business and was very successful. And I actually I did retire in 2012. And I took 2 glorious years of skiing and hiking and reading every book I ever wanted to read. I'm like one of those guys that actually read Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged.
Oh, I've read that several times. I
What an
love
awesome
that.
book, right?
Yes, yes.
Totally
Better than The
affected my thinking.
Fountainhead. Yes.
I read East of Eden. Like, I've read it like 4 times. It's like the best book ever by John Steinbeck, and so I just I enjoyed it very much. And then the Lord got a hold of me, and was like, I didn't, he basically let me know he didn't put me through everything he did and teach everything he did so that I could live the rest of my life for myself. That people were dying and they desperately needed help. And one of the things I saw as a cop in LA, I was a cop down in South Central, Compton, Watts area, was what happens when you have fatherless boys, when you don't have boys who are being taught how to be men. And one of the main things you need to be a man is self-control. It's kind of going back to the question you asked earlier. And so I started to be convicted that my life was not my own. And though I had been able to make money in business, God didn't bless me with that so that I could spend it on myself.
Right.
And so Promise Keepers came along was not something that I saw. And in fact, when I first became the chairman of Promise Keepers, that was a favor to a friend. And I wanted to close it down. I was just going to pay all of its debts and close it. Yeah. And that's when God got a hold of me again and said, this was what I was talking about, and this is what you're going to do. And that was in early 2018. And it's been 3 years of a hard journey. But I just, seeing the state of things now, I'm just so grateful the Lord's given me this opportunity. It's been crushing amount of work for zero pay. But I just can't wait. And Cheryl, when you hear the stories, I mean, I can give you a couple just quickly. I mean,
Yeah.
when I first took over Promise Keepers, we had a few people who had been giving for a long time, and one of them was this widow, and we had someone call her. She'd been giving $5 a month for 25 years,
Wow.
and
It's
he
faithful.
asked her why, and she said her husband was a pastor, and he went to Promise Keepers in 1993 or something or four, and she said, the man I got back from Promise Keepers was so utterly transformed as a human being. Our marriage was so transformed that I promised God I would give every penny I had to Promise Keepers for the rest of my life.
Wow.
And then she said to him, son, I hope you're not calling to ask me for money because it's everything I have. And we hear these kinds of stories all over the place about men who are utterly transformed, men who come to the event and go home and just in tears say to their wives, I'm so sorry, I had no idea. And I've heard from daughters. I was just talking to a gal not too long ago who was, I think, 19 or 20. Now she's 40. But she said at the time her dad was a workaholic, an alcoholic. He was an angry man. He went to Promise Keepers, came home, grabbed her by the hands, and he begged her for forgiveness for what a crummy father he'd been. And she said, now my dad is my best friend. So we hear about these utter transformation of people. And so I'm just so grateful to the Lord that he's given this opportunity to lay down my life for this cause, because I do believe God is about to do an amazing work in the church. And I don't believe it's about bringing back Promise Keepers. I think it's about doing a work in the hearts of the men, because it's the men right now who need to be woken up and reminded of who they are, because it's the world. Again, after that Atlanta shooting of the massage parlor and the world came out and tried to blame the church for crying out loud.
Yeah.
It's the world who tells men they're sexual perverts. It's the world who tells men that they're violent and they're selfish and all this kind of stuff. Men, when they follow Jesus Christ, are beautiful, humble creatures, and we need to remind them that in the grace of Jesus they can be who they are. So that's how I got back into this, and I do believe that there is going to be a great waking up of the church, and it's going to start in the hearts of the men this July 16th.
Do you think that you guys could go into, say, an inner city, say like the drug streets of Washington, D.C., where I'm out of right now, nearby? Could you go in there and change the hearts of those kids, of those boys?
Yeah, as long as we do it with the gospel. There's been so much. So you graciously took this interview an hour late, because I'm actually here in the inner city talking at a Black Pastors event right now. And the point is that we cannot have a do-gooder attitude. We cannot have an attitude where we're going to come in and tell people how they can be better people. We need to have an attitude where we go in and remind them of who they are, remind them that we're all sinners, and remind them that in Christ's grace, he can utterly transform us from the inside out. It's the same thing. What's killing the church is pornography. The men are looking at that nonsense, that garbage, and how do we possibly expect them to look at women being exploited like that? And then to treat women like equals, to treat their wives like they're cherished. But we're not going to get better by telling men to stop looking at pornography. When they receive Jesus Christ, he changes our desires from the inside out. I mean, true men of God would never look at pornography. It's horrible. It's disgusting. One of the things I say to men all the time is, if you are into pornography, and I'll come back to your question, but hopefully this is applicable. But if you're looking at pornography, it's not because you have a sex problem. It's because you're not in love with Jesus enough. Because if you're in love with Jesus, then you're in love with people. And when you're in love with people, you cannot watch somebody being exploited and not be angry with a righteous anger. And so you see that gal who's making that movie, she's not doing it for fun. She's doing it because she's been abused, trafficked, oppressed. And those people who are making that movie are not doing it because they're your pal. They're doing it because every time you click on that mouse, they're making more money to exploit more young girls. And a man of God sees that, and he wants to run in with a blanket and wrap it around that girl and say, you don't have to do this anymore. Let me tell you about Jesus. That's the same attitude we have to have towards the inner city. That these boys who were raised without fathers, which is where most of the violence comes from, they need to be shown what it is to be loved. They need to be shown what their identity is, who they really are, that they're not what the world tells them, that just violent or oppressed or victims of racism, and it'll never change, so don't even bother to try. Instead, they need to see that there is real hope. And so we need to go in with the gospel, not trying to do the right thing or be a good guy, but instead we do it because we want to spread the love of Jesus Christ. If we have that right attitude, we go in with truth, then we can change these inner cities.
That is such an important message. Wow, very thought provoking. Just cuts you right to the heart. Just to wrap up, how can people find out more about this event? How can they go? How can they get affiliated with Promise Keepers?
PromiseKeepersEvent.com
Hmm.
is where you can actually go and register for tickets. There's a bigger website that has all kinds of reading materials, especially if women are listening to this going, oh man, how do I get my husband some help on finances or alcoholism or whatever, right? That's promisekeepers.org. And so the other one, promisekeepersevent.com or promisekeepers.org. And I would just say 45% of the tickets in the 90s were bought by women to send their men, their sons, their husbands. And I would just say to women out there, the best Father's Day gift you can give your husband is to get him and your boys or his brothers or your neighbors to that event in Dallas. And Dallas is a big, next to the stadium, there's the Texas Rangers baseball stadium, so there's baseball right there. There's also a Six Flags amusement park. There's a water park. So it's like a whole man trip. So if your husband wanted to go down and bring your sons, it'll be a cool thing. But it's Friday night for 3 hours, a Saturday morning for 5 hours. I think it goes from 9 to 2. And it will be utterly transformational. They're going to see stuff and hear stuff that is really going to warm their heart. And I will tell you this too, that the biggest story here is from men who've been to Promise Keepers event in the 90s and saying, the feeling of hearing 80,000 men singing Amazing Grace is utterly transformational. I mean, I've had guys in their 70s in tears say, I've never experienced anything so powerful as seeing all those guys standing there just singing with abandon, men in tears, hugging each other. It's really an amazing thing. So if they can get there, bring your friends. Don't just come by yourself, but bring as many people as you can. And if you have means, then pay for the tickets for other people. Pay for the people to get there, because I really do believe this is going to be a moment of transformation in the church and this country starting on July 16th.
And boy, does our country need this right now, really.
I'm telling you.
Well, Ken Harrison, Chairman and CEO of Promise Keepers, thank you so much for the work you do. I am going to pray for you and for this event, and I hope my listeners will as well.
Thank you, Cheryl. I appreciate that.
Wow, Promise Keepers. Geez, I've heard about the organization and I've known about the organization, and I even remember seeing video clips of some of the events that Ken was just referencing. But really, how touching, and what a great thing for America. What a really much needed, crucial thing for America. Teaching men to be followers of Christ.